Hello there, and welcome to another episode of The Value of Everything. So, we have had a number of new developments in the market. It seems like China have all the action happening, and the rest of the world is watching and learning as time progresses. Please note I'm a little bit low on battery power on this recording, so if I do cut out, I do apologise. I'll try and make it up in some way. Now, as I mentioned, I've mentioned this a little bit in Donald Trump commentary, which I've provided as to the man, and by the way, I jumble up episodes a little bit just so that I can give the ones which are a little bit more prime release straight away, and the ones which don't really necessarily need instant release I can just give out a little bit later. So you may find the episodes a little bit jumbled up at times. I do apologise, and I've sort of I originally marked all the episodes with dates. I sort of removed those now, so I'm a little bit more timeless, but you can still get the upload dates, which pretty much will be within about a couple of days, maybe 5 days, recorded at no more than 5 days prior to the upload date, I would imagine. Now, with regards to China, and sorry, I was mentioning about Donald Trump, so I did record a episode on Donald Trump, and I did go into a certain level of detail about where he stands on certain things. There is a quote which he mentions where the best thing, he's like the master of negotiating deals. And one of the more positive things he's mentioned is that he believes that a good deal is where two people can walk away and both feel pleased with the outcome, which is fantastic, but that's a fairly old quote. But then there has been a number of remarks made by Donald Trump about how China is currency manipulating. There's been obviously a number of, this is obviously a potential future candidate, Donald Trump, probably the way things are going at the moment, where he won't get as much telly time because of the powers with, I think there's Rupert Murdoch that's not quite happy with Donald Trump, so they're probably going to give him a little bit less media exposure, so that's kind of interesting. So, but who really knows if Donald Trump's going to be able to push through. But even so, not only Donald Trump, but a lot of the administration of the United States has mentioned before that they're not happy with the way that China will manipulate their currency to give it an advantage in manufacturing over America. Now, this is one of the mentions I gave with Donald Trump, is that we potentially have a state where protectionism can occur. I've made cases before in the past that protectionism is never going to be beneficial for any country, and once the trade goods stop, then between two countries and nations, then we do have a next state of potential war that occurs. Now, there is really the conventional war we might think is probably a little bit out of the question nowadays, with us all having plenty of nuclear bombs, and we'll just bomb each other into smithereens, and then you'll just have a few government ministers left over in an underground tavern, who will all probably go a bit mad and insane and then kill each other, and then that'll be the rest of the world decimated, and probably just the few people that are left on all these little island places probably survive and then retake over the world. But in general terms, protectionism is never the really clever way of doing business dealings. The centrally planned way of controlling financial markets is never the best way either. And particularly when you're a communist government and not a Western government. So China has done a number of things now to manipulate the markets to give them a advantageous report as to how they're doing in terms of giving themselves exponential double-digit percentage increases in productivity of their markets. So they want to keep onto that trajectory, and the way that is usually done is to continuously increase liquidity, or sorry, not liquidity, but credit expansion, expand the production of infrastructure, expand the production of building houses, expand the production of machinery and more factory operating jobs. So that's usually the way that is done. And China's got themselves into a little bit of a sticky spot because previously they had plenty of turbulences in the Shanghai Composite Index and a number of other Asian markets. But they had basically stopped the short selling, whereby a short sale is where you have these big institutional pension services or superannuation services. They exist in the market. They always buy these all the big stock market company shares. So if you want to short something, you go to them, you buy the share off them, and then you instantly sell it. But you say to the big institutional pension fund, I will give it back to you in a year's time or whatever period of time, and then you hope and pray that that stock falls in value so that you can buy it back for a cheaper price that you originally bought it for. And then once that year has come back and the short selling party has asked for the stock back, you can buy it back, and then you make a tiny little sum and then sell it back to this big institution. So that's how the method of a short selling happens. It's just a natural mechanism of the market. It's perfectly natural. There is nothing violent in the occurrence of that happening. There is nothing fraudulent in the way that that's occurred. If there's no complainant between the two parties, or the three parties basically, when that's happened. So it's interesting in those terms. Maybe the company that's who holds the stock's probably a little bit annoyed that people are thinking that their stock's going to go down in value and doing that, but it is a natural thing of the market, and between the parties there has been an agreement and there is no violence that's been caused. So in a moral question, there is nothing wrong with a short sell, but the Chinese state has decided that that's an immoral act, and in that they have prevented any short selling. And I think the short selling has been still prevented for some time now anyway. They have put on certain blocks to, when the market was going down too heavily, they stopped the market from working. So they just basically closed the market so nobody could trade at all. They stopped the stocks of the ones that were most in danger from trading whatsoever for quite an extended period of time. So there's quite a humongous amount of manipulation to a market which really should be just free. If you're a government, really what you want to do is just have a little bit of a tax regime and take a little bit of tax. And if you're like one that's trying to manage in the world of like modern economy, as like a normal economy. Maybe if the market goes a little bit bad, you might want to play around with liquidity. So if you're a government and you've got plenty of money to splash around and the market's going down, maybe you would like to offer the market a bit of liquidity. Now, if you're an Austrian economics person, then you would say that this is natural formation of a market. The market has become, there's been a massive misallocation of resources. There's been a misallocation of credit expansion, and the market force is now telling you that the credit expansion has gone too far, and the market needs to go back into a short or a selling cycle until it has reached a point of price discovery, and then the market can ascend again, depending on whether the perceived value is good or not to the participants in the market. So really, it's good for you to just leave the market play out in its own special way. And where there's been misallocations of resources, then more wiser choices can be made. If you continuously bail out and prop up financial institutions and other things, then you potentially lay up a problem, kick the can down the road for a later day. You potentially have wasted talent which could have retrained and retooled into different other markets. There's a number of things that can happen when centrally planned manipulation can occur. Now, with China, they do have a currency which is the Chinese yuan, and it is pegged to the US dollar. And I believe it's probably going to be in some kind of they're trying to slowly get it to be a viable market traded currency, but they have made a swift move to prevent it from they've actually made a swift move to devalue their currency versus the US dollar. Now, the instant effects of that enables the exporters, because China is a major manufacturing country, it's the second largest economy. If it lowers the export prices of the Chinese yuan by 2%, that in theory makes people from abroad, particularly the Western countries, think that there is much more value to be had from having these cheap Chinese goods, particularly from like the retail sectors of the Western countries, and they'll potentially might be inclined to purchase more orders and thus stimulating the Chinese economy. So whereby you've lowered the currency, now you are stimulating growth, and potentially you are getting another state of expansion of your gross domestic products, because there'll be more trades that'll be occurring, and economically China will be looking like it's doing a lot better. Now, there are definite issues with that happening. Firstly, there's diplomatic issues, because let's cover the diplomatic issues a little bit later. I'll go to something else. We have domestically, there's an issue in terms of the people that are working in these factories. Now, I imagine that a Chinese person is really not going to be earning, who's working on a manufacturing floor. Just the average Chinese person working on a manufacturing floor is really not going to get an incredible amount of money for what he's done. So now that you have lowered the Chinese yuan by 2%, I wouldn't imagine most Chinese people are buying foreign goods that much. I guess the middle class Chinese may be able to afford iPhones, so those type of things become quite expensive. But when it comes to general food costs, I believe that China is fairly self-sufficient, but there are a number of foods which are not, which are not self-sufficient. If you think maybe potentially there's a lot of imported meats which go to China, so in some ways there is a certain effect on the living standards of the Chinese people by increasing the costs of imported products. So there's definitely things to consider in that respect, especially, and obviously there's a little knockback in the Chinese economy if the Chinese retail sector, they are now having to import goods which are more expensive, particularly if it's like very high-end products. I know China does do high-end products as well now, but a lot of like the iPhones, the high technology quality products will be unavailable. Well, it can make it just a little bit harder for the general market to purchase those items. So it's interesting in those respects. Big ticket items now. Obviously, people are now thinking, okay, well, rather than purchasing goods from abroad, I might purchase a mobile device from China because that's still incredibly cheaper as well. So there are a lot of advantages, but there are certain concerns. I know there's a lot of political issues in terms of the general public's wages and living standards and how they're finding it pretty tough. So potentially the Communist Party will have an issue in terms of what they've done there, particularly because they are for workers' rights and for the individual's prosperity. And if they have chosen to do that in the sake of the economy, and really it does seem to help out more so the large business owners who are exporting, then that can seem to be a little less of a communist way of thinking and a little bit more of the right side, what's the word? Fascist almost side of things. So there are certain concerns and there could be certain civic unrests, but China does seem to be pretty good at keeping its population under control when it comes to those problems. There has been a number of there's been certain rises in the past, but China, the state, doesn't seem to. I think the living standards and the qualities. I think that one of the common things people usually mention is the economy stupid. If the economy still is perceived as doing well and better, and if they've got a memory that goes beyond maybe 10 years or 20 years, they can still say, well, we're driving around in cars now, and that wasn't the case beforehand, and I think I will keep my mouth shut and not really argue now that I can eat pork and rice instead of just rice alone. So it's interesting in those degrees. So yeah, so there's certain balances which the Chinese government are trying to overcome, and the problem is they're getting themselves a little bit into a tight spot, and particularly when they play around with the market. Now, I always think that there's something with where you do have governments around. One of the things that they don't want really, no real government wants to be that last place where the shit hits the fan and everything goes into a massive freefall, so that one of the economies which are doing alright-ish comes over and then starts to purchase all of the assets at ridiculously cheap value. But I guess governments can put in certain embargoes and restrictions for other countries from doing that. But I think that there's potentially that foreseen circumstance. Nobody wants to be the first one to, like, the big nation to go bust first. So the kicking the can down the road is always the first viable option. But as everything is so interlinked and intertwined in financial markets, you do have a real feeling that once the bomb blows, then the financial bomb blows, and the credit expansion does really get to a point where it has to deflate because there are defaults which are occurring, then everyone will go down at the same time. But I don't know why I'm laughing. It's not really that amusing, but it's I guess in the terms of like where you get the government desperately trying to manage itself and keep its own power, and then it crashes in that respect. And so that is a number of aspects as to why China has lowered its currency, and it's really playing a very tight little game right now. And one of the other issues that it has now with doing that, so it potentially has increased the prosperity. Well, it probably would have increased the prosperity of the share market, which had been trying to manage so desperately, and put in all these market procedures to prevent the market turning against it, and purchasing these massive using these arms of theirs, which are like these corporations that work on their behalf to throw money into the market. So they probably got pretty sick of doing that, and probably have lost a lot of money in the process. And now they've decided that they are willing to take a few more political hits rather than taking the financial hits. It all boils down to the green. Now, when we get to this point now, they've made obviously they've made an educated guess here that it's probably better off for them to take a diplomatic hit and a people hit in comparison to taking a hit with the economy again and trying to keep propped up the stock market with all the craziness that can go on with them. And no government has ever really conquered the market. I guess China, you could say that they have tried to put in I know governments put in interest rates to calm and quell and inflate the markets and things like that, but to really manage panic, a government really doesn't succeed after a while. They end up going belly up eventually. Now, so they've decided on the potential domestic qualms of the people, particularly as they're a communist state, and they have kicked off the protectionism spate, which potentially goes into the economic warfare. Now, there is, when we say warfare, let's just determine it as there's competitiveness between countries for more economic advantage over one another. Let's just say it in that terms, and let's look at it in terms of a government wants to have the richest tax pool to get the largest amounts of tax so that they can be rich, prosperous, and powerful. Let's just determine it in those sense. Now, they want to be in charge of the best beast and get the highest tax in return. So when we look at America, now America's going, all right, so where China's going along, they seem to be looking after themselves. They're obviously a communist state, and they really don't know how to run a free market economy. Not to say that they're a truly free market economy themselves anyway, but they're trying to centrally plan their economy, and they are now advantaging themselves over the market, and that could be perceived as them looking after themselves and not really being one of these good trading partners as what could be perceived before in the past, as do most of all the other countries that like to trade with America. Now, with those terms, America has a few options. Now, obviously, I would expect America is China's biggest customer. Now, America also has the problem. It gets a little bit trickier now because America is also in debt with China by an incredible amount. So there is the customer and the debtor, which is occurring here at the same time. but the customer obviously has the highest amount of military, but not to mention that China has it itself as well, and it's the second largest economy at the same time. So there is a number of factors to take into the equation, and it's not quite as simple as one pulling one move against the other. But the easy move, and the one that probably will do will have probably the least impact directly, will be the virtual one, where you can spy and espionage, because there really isn't really much of a return tit for tat. You'll just get a mention from a politician saying they're spying on us, but we can't really tell you what they're spying on. So there's the underground sort of battle which occurs, but then you've got the financial battle, and the return fight from America is going to be very interesting. I can't still see right now that China, they will say to China, particularly with the tight spot they're in with regards to all the bonds being possessed, well, majority of the bonds being possessed by China, then turn around and say, right, well, we're going to put an embargo on, because China can obviously just turn around and say, well, we're just working our currency within the market. It's just a way that the state can manage its economy, and it's not isolated or threatening just America alone. This is a global choice that we're making. But America obviously can say, well, no, this isn't really quite right. We are obviously the ones that are going to be the most affected by this currency devaluation that you've done for yourself, and it's not quite so fair. So in return of this, we will counteract that and raise our import tax of Chinese goods by 2%. So yeah, we can get down that route of this tit for tat, and then there's obviously a progression of that state. So obviously, if you think of two kids, one day one pushes the other, and then the other person doesn't like it, and then the other person pushes him back, and then he doesn't like it, and then there is an escalation day on day of the certain levels of which people will restrict and halt trade from one country to another. Now, the interesting point of this is obviously the voting public go, no, we don't like other countries being successful. We want our country to be number one. Usually that's the common ideal. But when it comes to business is really like, well, obviously, like if you're a retailer in America, you're like, well, shit, no, we don't really want China to be becoming more expensive and more expensive. But they're just a pawn player in the whole grand scheme of things. And when it comes to the economy as a whole, what we're doing now is we're potentially, for America, where you might have had jobs that could have been outsourced or automated, now those jobs are being held in America, and the protectionism is occurring, and there potentially isn't the skills which are learning these other, so the people that are learning these different skills and mastering different technologies. Maybe people should be moving over to the new sphere of decentralized finance and wallets and Bitcoin, blockchain technology. Lawyers could be wiped out by having everything labeled to your possessions and itineraries. So there's a number of new markets which could be occurring, but instead, because there is a certain level of protectionism which is occurring, markets which would have been outsourced or changed over are now just kept in America, and people are not being pushed in the realms that man has always been pushed in, which is adapt and survive. So adapt and survive is the one reason why we're all around here today, is that we can adapt to our environment. So big guys now can sit in offices and tap away at the computer because they're fairly adaptable, and they've got the human mind which has got a certain level of neuroplasticity and can adapt to their environment quite swiftly, and the guys that haven't been able to adapt to this new environment are going to be given a less of the best genetic pool of the women and yada 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 and things like that. I guess we could say, well, this is a world we're living in where everyone's chasing the money, and I guess that is a point, but I would say that in the future where people can really focus on creating value and having money as being basically like the exhaust fume of what is happening, like the counterproduct of what is happening, but really what your number one goal should be is to be creating value for other people, like the greatest business entrepreneurs in the world. They've always had that idea to create value rather than generating themselves loads of money. If you start going through Henry Ford's quotes, he sounds like a communist, but he honestly isn't, and he is amazing at how he's thinking about continuously improving people's lives, creating value. He is the best and one of the most brilliant capitalists that there's ever been. So just definitely just read up on that person. So that's the way that people should be inclined to think, but unfortunately it's not, and we get to a state where everyone is going to go down this route, or the government is going to go down this route of protectionism, and we have problems now. We have more economic problems on top of the economic problems. Now, not only do we have a humongous problem with credit expansion, and credit expansion that's gone too far, that people really cannot sustain the credit expansion any further, so that everything really should be depreciating. Now, we're seeing depreciation occurring in commodity markets, but it should be going across the board, and particularly into the financial and into the housing markets, the real estate markets once again, but it's being held up with the stock market as well. So we do expect that there should be, well, there should be a certain amount of misallocation of resources in these areas, and there should have been a retractment, a lot more. I'd expect there would have been a lot more of a larger retractment of these industries if government manipulation on the part of, say, America and other Western countries didn't walk in and use quantitative easing to prop up the banking system and feed liquidity into the markets so they could stay around and prosper a little bit longer. And then again, you're having the same things as I mentioned before. You have markets which had incorrect allocations of resources, have had intelligent people going into those markets and then being wasted and squandered, where they could have retooled and improved in different areas and spheres. So yeah, interesting little states in the news at the moment with this. We don't know what kind of movements are being made at this point in time with Barack Obama. He is, well, you could say his mandate when he came into power is to be a very peaceful president and to have less wars in the world. Yet he still seems to be quite warring. But something could be said potentially of the military-industrial complex rather than the actual president, which probably didn't really get too much of a say in those things, particularly when it comes to his political party funding, and with all the major spy networks having all the data on him in the first place. So he's probably in a bit of a tight corner anyway in terms of what he can do. So yeah, we may have Barack Obama still keeping it calm and saying this is what they're doing, and maybe potentially there will be, but I would imagine from a Republican perspective, because they can be a little bit more nationalistic, you can, but even though you would expect them to be better economists, and maybe a little bit more inclined to being a little libertarian, the conservative side may go down the route of being apologies for that, may decide to be protectionist and nationalistic. Now, whenever you hear these little words of protectionism and nationalism, these are warning shots. I mean, obviously you can make your own choice on these matters, but I would be very dubious when you hear those things, because with protectionism, we are protecting you. You've got to ask questions. Who am I being protected from? Why does this job really need to be protected? Could I be doing something else? What is the long-term effects of this protection? Is it going to create a better world for us, or is it going to create a worse world for us? There is all these manners of things which can occur, which may create a problem. Next up is nationalism. In terms of nationalism, we have problems of questioning, why do I consider myself a person of this nation? Am I exactly the same political mindset as everyone else? Am I as good as everybody else, or am I even the same race as anybody else? All these questions would fire up, and a lot of those answers would be probably not. You're not the same as everybody else, and there's probably a lot of shits out there and a lot of good people, and you're somewhere in the mix of those, and you can't really say that you're this person. You might have the same accent to a certain degree, and you might have watched the same TV, and there's a certain blend of things that you may have had and shared, but I'm sure that my nationality is English or British, and I'm living in Australia. I might have a lot more things in tune with you, and you may be an American. So, where does your nationalism sort of fit in those terms? So be wary of where governments do start firing up these warning flares of these people are being unpatriotic, and these people, China's being threatening to us, and we need to protect our borders. So yeah, always be very concerned with that, and be very watchful and mindful, and just keep your wits amongst yourself when approaching these things. Particularly with the financial warfare, there is a steady progression. This has happened in the past, and there is a big history on this. I may do a little bit, I might just get a few more facts together and potentially release a new podcast out in a later about protectionism, because I do see this formation happening, and it is a historical pattern which is occurring here, and I do not wish this to be a pattern to repeat itself. In my opinion, I would love there to be a certain amount of debt relief which occurs, a government which retracts itself down to the most minimalist state, to cool down its arms, to lower the amount of military it is in the world, to be more peaceful. There's a way of doing that, and one of the best methodologies is to raise your children peacefully. Then we can provide the world with more peaceful children, so they'll be less inclined to be riled up with nationalism, have our children more interested in themselves, and be self-interested in their improvements, and to focus on themselves and not consider themselves as one of the communists or one of the people. They have to really pursue themselves in their own certain excellence. That will give us a great new world. So things to consider there. And yeah, I really, if you do have any more pointers that you'd like to share with me on this, I guess it's more of a, I thought I was going to go quite financial, but I've gone financial and political here. There is obviously a number of ramifications with all of this, and I can see that at a certain point down the road there can be issues for us sitting here, and I guess the main problem is escalation, and we really do not want escalations between the governments, because the power is out of our hands. We're not in control of what the governments can do anymore, and they can slowly escalate against each other, or even rapidly escalate against each other. And we never really got a say in all of this in the first place, other than just casting our vote a little bit in the past, and then all the people that get to make all the decisions are really the ones that are funding the political parties after a while, and the ones that are in power and have done the most favours to the other people. And our lives are in these government body hands, and it's quite a terrifying circumstance to be in, whereby we really just want to be in the control and power of our own hands. So thank you very much for listening to this show. Please share it on if you do enjoy it, and I will be in touch, or I'll be in voice very soon.